Well, in Estonia, parliamentary elections Sunday brought an important victory for the centre-right Reform Party of Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. They also confirmed widespread approval for Estonia's support for Ukraine, and this despite the country's shared history with Russia. Estonia used to be part of the Soviet Union. It shares a border with Russia, and it also has a sizable Russian minority. Well, to get a bit more analysis on all of this, let's bring in France 24's chief foreign editor, Robert Parsons. Rob, first of all, did the Prime Minister's victory in Estonia come as much of a surprise?
Yeah, I think not really in the end, although the size of the victory perhaps, because over the last few weeks she seemed to have been polling well. Although earlier on it looked like she was going to really struggle against the EKRE party, which is much more populist, right-wing, not very sympathetic to her position on the war in Ukraine, against providing Estonian weapons to Ukraine, against letting Ukrainian refugees come into the country. So she had a really significant opponent in the EKRE, this turned in effect into a referendum on her policies towards Ukraine. Bear in mind, too, that this is at a time when the economy has been suffering as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, with electricity prices going up, inflation around about 20%, and the feeling growing that, this, if it was ever going to happen, this is a moment when people might say in Estonia, enough is enough. And clearly that's what Moscow would have liked to have happened, and would have seen this as perhaps the start of a process elsewhere in Europe, where European populations in elections as they come by would say, we've had enough of this, supporting Ukraine to such a large extent. But it didn't happen. On the contrary, Kaja Kallas' Reform Party did better than it did in 2019 and won 37 of the 101 seats in Parliament, 31% of the vote. She's now in a strong position to form a coalition government in which her policies will stay in position, she hopes, I imagine, for the next 4 years.
So Baltic countries like Estonia in general are relatively vulnerable to Russian aggression, and yet they don't really seem to be that intimidated. Why?
Yeah, you're right. They are vulnerable. First of all, because they're right next to, they're on the border with Russia. Secondly, two of them have very large Russian populations. Estonia, 24% of the population. Latvia, exactly the same, 24% of the population. In one town in Estonia, Narva, 60,000 people, 95% of the population is ethnic Russian. Yet this does not seem to have translated in votes for pro-Russian parties in either country. In Latvia, there were elections last October. Centre-right party won, very just like Kaja Kallas in Estonia. Very pro-support for Ukraine. So any hopes that the Russians, that Moscow may have had, that a large Russian minority in these two countries would have translated in support for them doesn't seem to be happening. On the contrary, what we're seeing from all three Baltic countries is that they're leading the way in Europe for tougher policies against Russia, for more support for Ukraine, for greater NATO presence in the Baltic countries, and so on and so forth. If you look too at some of the key issues that have taken place over the last few months. Should Germany supply Leopard tanks to Ukraine, for instance? It's the Baltic countries, in particular Kaja Kallas, who've been pressing the Germans, saying you've got to do more. And on the issue of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine as well, it's been Latvia that's been pressing for that. Coming up to the NATO summit in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, in July, I expect that all three Baltic countries will be very prominent in continuing to press the case for more support rather than less to Ukraine.
Rob, thanks for that. That's France 24's chief foreign editor, Robert Parsons.